All right, today we're going to walk through the entire journey of an investigational medicinal product, or IMP for short. This is the super precise, heavily regulated path a new drug takes from the lab all the way to a clinical trial. And every single step, as you'll see, is all about one thing: patient safety. So, let's get into it.
Now, to make all this feel a little less like a textbook, we're going to follow a case study. Let's imagine a new drug, we'll call it IMP 734, from a fictional sponsor named Apex Labs. By tracking its path from start to finish, we're going to see exactly how these critical rules play out in the real world.
So, we've broken down this whole journey into 6 main stages. We're going to start at the very beginning with the sponsor's role, then follow the drug as it gets made and shipped. After that, we'll cover what happens when it arrives at the clinical site, how it's handled, and finally, how everything is wrapped up and accounted for at the end.
Okay, let's dive right in. You gotta know, this whole process, it all starts with one key player, the sponsor. You can think of them as the architects of the entire clinical trial.
So, the sponsor, in our story, that's Apex Labs, is where the buck stops. They have the overall responsibility. They don't just kick off the trial, they create the entire playbook, the detailed written procedures that everyone has to follow. And that covers everything from how the drug is handled and stored to how it's transported, both for the manufacturer and the people at the clinical site. All right, next up, we're moving from the sponsor's plan on paper to the actual physical product. This is stage 2, where our fictional drug, IMP 734, is actually made and prepped for its big journey. The manufacturer is the one who takes those instructions from Apex Labs and makes them real. They produce the final drug, they package it specifically for each person in the trial, and they make sure that packaging is tough enough to protect the product's integrity the whole way. And maybe most importantly, they document everything and keep a super detailed inventory of every single shipment that goes out the door.
Now, this is a key detail for quality control. There are actually 2 different types of samples that have to be kept. You've got reference samples, which are set aside for any future lab testing on the product itself. But then you also have retention samples. These are fully packaged units, just like the ones shipped out, and they're kept just for identification purposes. It's kind of like a 2-layer safety net for quality.
This brings us to something that is just absolutely vital for keeping subjects safe and making sure the trial data is sound. I'm talking about the IMP label. You can think of it as the drug's passport. So what exactly has to be on it?
Here's the checklist. These are the absolute non-negotiables for our drug IMP 734. You've got everything from the sponsor's contact info and the subject's ID number, all the way to storage conditions and the use-by date. And this is critical. All of this information has to be written in the official language of the country where the trial is actually happening. Before a single dose of IMP 734 can even think about leaving the manufacturing site, it needs 2 things: a final, expert sign-off, and a really carefully planned trip.
And that final sign-off, that green light, comes from someone called the Qualified Person, or QP. This person is the ultimate quality gatekeeper. It's their job to personally review everything and certify that all the good manufacturing practice rules have been followed to the letter. Nothing, and I mean nothing, moves without their signature.
So, once it's released, our sponsor, Apex Labs, is also on the hook for the journey itself. They have to make sure the shipping company can maintain very specific conditions, like temperature, the entire time. They also have to include all the right paperwork and, you guessed it, keep a detailed inventory. The goal here is a perfectly secure handover to the clinical site. Now, the moment that shipment arrives at the clinical trial site, well, that's a really high-stakes moment. This is where the responsibility gets passed on, and it kicks off an immediate, and I mean immediate, and very careful verification process.
So, the box with IMP 734 just landed on the receiving dock. What's the very first thing you do? You don't just put it on a shelf and get to it later. Nope, you start an 8-step inspection right then and there. There is absolutely no room for delay.
The first 4 steps are all about the big picture. Is the package damaged? Is all the paperwork there, especially that super important QD signed certificate? And hey, is this shipment even for my trial site? And of course, you check the labeling.
After that, you drill down into the nitty-gritty. You're verifying the expiry date, confirming the patient ID and the dosage info, checking what the required storage conditions are, and, this is a big one, you're verifying the data from any temperature monitors to make sure nothing went wrong during transit. So that's what happens when everything goes perfectly. But what if it doesn't? What happens if you find a crushed box, a missing certificate, or a temperature reading that's way out of range?
The rule here is simple and absolute.
You quarantine it. You don't guess, you don't take a chance, you don't proceed. You immediately quarantine the entire shipment. That means you label it, you secure it in a totally separate area, under the right storage conditions, of course, and you pick up the phone and contact the sponsor, Apex Labs, for instructions.
Okay, so let's say IMP 734 has passed its inspection with flying colors and it's been accepted. Now the focus shifts to making sure it's handled and stored perfectly right there at the clinical site. And this right here really shows you the kind of constant watchfulness that's required. The product gets stored immediately under the right conditions, but look at the number of checks. You check the label before you dispense it, you document that you dispensed it, and then you check that very same label one last time right before you give it to the subject.
Sooner or later, the trial comes to an end. But what happens to all the unused units of IMP 734? They don't just get tossed in a bin. Every single dose has to be perfectly accounted for.
When it comes to unused products, there are really only two ways to go, and neither one is casual. The first option is to return it to the sponsor, following a very strict, documented process. The other option is to destroy it on site, but, and this is a big but, that can only happen if you have explicit, written approval from the sponsor, Apex Labs.
This is the final accountability check. It means every single dose, the ones that were used and the ones that were not, has to be carefully recorded and reconciled. If even one single dose is missing or unaccounted for, that discrepancy has to be investigated and fully explained before the sponsor's quality team will sign off on the final numbers.
So as you can see, this whole thing is an unbroken chain of custody and responsibility. It flows from the sponsor, to the manufacturer, to the QP, all the way to the staff at the clinical site. The integrity of the entire trial, and more importantly, the safety of every subject, depends on every person in that chain knowing their role and doing it flawlessly. The real key to success is knowing which link in that chain are you.